General Motors announced that it is going to get rid of the Saturn brand. Talks to sell the division have collapsed. The Penske Group, headed by racing legend Roger Penske, was in negotiations to buy the brand.
In the early 1990s, something strange happened on American roads. A small, plastic-bodied sedan started showing up in suburban driveways and college parking lots. Its doors didn't dent. Its engine kept running. Owners bragged not about horsepower, but about oil changes they forgot to schedule and repairs they never had to make. Quietly, almost embarrassingly, this car was doing something no one thought an American company could do anymore. It was playing Toyota's game, and winning. This was the Saturn S Series. Built by Saturn, inside the shadow of General Motors, it nearly matched Toyota on the very metrics Toyota would later dominate the world with. Reliability, efficiency, manufacturing discipline, and then, just as quietly as it arrived, it was allowed to disappear. A different kind of American car. The idea for Saturn did not come from confidence. It came from fear. By the mid-1980s, General Motors was bleeding credibility. Japanese cars were eating into the small car market with alarming consistency. Toyotas and Hondas started every morning, ran for years, and asked for very little in return. GM's compact cars, by contrast, rattled, rusted, and returned to dealerships far too often. Warranty costs climbed, loyalty evaporated. Inside GM, executives finally admitted what they had resisted for years. The problem was not image, it was execution. So, they did something radical. They isolated a team. They gave it its own factory, its own labor agreement, its own engineering rules. And they told them to forget everything Detroit had taught them. In Spring Hill, Tennessee, the Saturn plant did not look like a traditional GM factory. Workers rotated jobs. Teams stopped the line if something looked wrong. Engineers walked the floor instead of issuing memos. Decisions that once required layers of approval were made in the same room they were debated. The goal was not speed, it was consistency. The Saturn S Series was engineered with restraint that felt almost foreign to GM culture. The engines were simple, the transmissions conservative. The body panels were plastic, not for style, but because they resisted dents and corrosion. Interiors were plain, but tightly assembled. Nothing glittered, nothing flexed. The car did not try to impress at first glance. What it did instead was fit, panels lined up. Doors closed with the same sound every time. Switches felt identical from car to car. Early test vehicles racked up miles without drama. Oil stayed where it was supposed to stay. Engineers logged fewer surprises than they were used to seeing. For once, the data didn't argue back. Dealers noticed immediately. The cars came back less often. When they did, it was usually for routine service. Owners noticed too. They talked about gas mileage, about winter starts, about driving for months without thinking about the car at all. This was Toyota's territory, and Saturn was standing in it comfortably. The SE Series did not arrive with a spectacle. There were no mystery campaigns or overpromises. Saturn invited customers into showrooms with fixed pricing and smiling sales staff trained to explain, not pressure. People stayed longer than expected. Some came back with friends. The car sold itself by not demanding attention. Inside General Motors, the numbers raised eyebrows. Warranty claims were low. Quality scores climbed. Assembly consistency rivaled imports. For a brief moment, Saturn proved something dangerous. The problem had never been American workers, or American engineers, or American customers. The problem had been will. And for a short, fragile window, the Saturn S Series showed what happened when discipline replaced habit. And when an American car dared to beat Toyota by copying nothing except the rules that actually mattered. Playing Toyota's game. The Saturn S Series was not designed to win comparisons on a showroom floor. It was designed to survive the years that followed. That difference shaped every decision made at Spring Hill. While other General Motors divisions chased refresh cycles and feature lists, Saturn engineers obsessed over repeatability. Bolts were standardized, processes were documented and followed. Variance, not cost, was treated as the enemy. The factory floor told the story better than any brochure. Workstations were laid out to reduce movement. Tools were calibrated and checked constantly. Teams tracked defects in real time, not at the end of a shift. If something felt wrong, the line slowed. If it looked wrong, it stopped. These were practices long associated with Toyota, but here they were being applied by American workers building an American car with an American badge. The S-Series reflected that discipline in ways owners could feel without understanding why. Panels fit flush across cars built months apart. Steering wheels were centered. Seats wore evenly. Engines settled into a steady rhythm instead of a nervous shake. Nothing about the car felt dramatic, but nothing demanded attention either. It did not beg to be noticed. It simply worked. Early quality reports confirmed what the factory already suspected. The S-Series returned fewer defects per vehicle than most GM models. Warranty claims stayed low well past the first year. Dealers reported fewer angry customers and fewer repeat visits. Service managers, accustomed to juggling complaints, found themselves with quieter bays. This was not luck, it was a process. Fuel economy added to the surprise. The car was light, not because it was cheap, but because it was uncomplicated. The plastic body panels resisted dents in parking lots and did not rust through winter salt. Owners noticed after the first scrape that nothing chipped. The car looked the same month after month, year after year. Saturn's sales experience reinforced the philosophy. Prices were fixed. Negotiation was removed from the equation. Salespeople were trained to walk customers through the car rather than around it. The approach disarmed buyers who expected pressure and posturing. People lingered. They asked questions. They trusted the answers. Word spread quietly. Saturn owners talked to neighbors. They loaned their cars to friends. They compared maintenance costs. The brand did not rely on conquest sales. It grew through repetition. For buyers cross-shopping Japanese sedans, the S-Series felt familiar in the best way. It asked for little and returned consistency. Inside General Motors, the car created discomfort. The S-Series did not follow the traditional playbook, yet it delivered results the playbook promised. Its success challenged assumptions about scale, labor, and control. Some executives saw proof of a better way. Others saw an anomaly that could not be replicated without disrupting too much. Still, for a brief stretch, the numbers were undeniable. The Saturn S-Series matched Toyota where it mattered most, quality over time. It did not outsell Toyota, but it earned something rarer inside Detroit: respect. And that respect, quietly earned, set the stage for a question General Motors was never fully prepared to answer. If this worked here, why not everywhere? Proof on the road. By the mid-1990s, the proof was no longer confined to charts on conference room tables. It was visible in driveways. Saturn S-Series cars with 100,000 miles still carried original transmissions. Door panels flexed back into shape after shopping carts hit them. Engines that had never been opened started on cold mornings without hesitation. Owners kept driving because there was no reason to stop. Service records told the same story. Oil changes, brake pads, tires. The repair orders lacked drama. Dealership technicians began recognizing the same cars returning only for routine maintenance year after year. Some owners joked that they missed seeing the service department. The cars did not demand attention, and that absence became the feature. Independent reliability surveys noticed. The Saturn S-Series appeared alongside Toyotas and Hondas in rankings that Detroit brands rarely touched. Not at the bottom, not in the middle, near the top. The badge confused people who still associated American cars with excuses. Yet the data stayed consistent. Fewer defects, fewer complaints, fewer surprises. At Saturn homecoming events, owners parked their cars in rows outside the Spring Hill plant. Hoods popped open, mileage stickers scribbled on windows. Employees walked among them, listening. One owner pointed to a plastic fender that had bounced back after a minor accident. Another talked about driving across states without checking coolant once. These were not stories of passion. They were stories of trust. Meanwhile, inside General Motors, the contrast grew sharper. Other divisions struggled with recalls, quality campaigns, and declining loyalty. Saturn did not fix everything. It simply avoided many problems altogether. The gap became awkward. Meetings included the same quiet question, phrased in different ways. Why does this one behave differently? The answer sat in plain sight. Spring Hill had fewer layers. Decisions moved faster. Workers stopped the line without permission. Engineers walked the floor daily. Changes happened before problems spread. None of this was secret. It was simply inconvenient to copy. Across the Pacific, Toyota continued refining the same principles. While Saturn proved they could be applied in America, Toyota scaled them relentlessly. Year after year, they widened their lead, not through spectacle, but through repetition. The Saturn S Series remained steady. It did not surge, but it did not falter either. Owners replaced worn cars with newer Saturns. Loyalty rates climbed. The experiment had crossed its most difficult test, time. Yet, something stalled. Expansion plans slowed, resources thinned. Saturn remained a separate island inside a massive corporation that measured success by volume and margins elsewhere. The practices that made the S-Series dependable stayed contained, admired, but isolated. On the road, the cars kept accumulating miles. In parking lots, they blended in. No one pointed, no one bragged. They simply arrived and left again, reliably, quietly, doing exactly what they had been designed to do. The Saturn S Series had proven the point. An American car could match Toyota by respecting process, discipline, and restraint. The question was no longer whether it could be done. The question was whether anyone was willing to let it continue. When the numbers spoke. The moment Saturn's experiment should have changed, everything did not arrive with an announcement. It arrived in reports. Quiet binders circulated through offices at General Motors, filled with tables that looked wrong to anyone accustomed to Detroit's usual results. Warranty claims were lower than expected. Assembly defects fell within tighter bands. Customer retention climbed instead of leaking away. The Saturn S Series was not outperforming expectations because expectations had been modest. It was outperforming peers. Dealers felt it first. Their service bays, normally crowded with early complaints on new models, stayed open. The same Saturns came back on predictable schedules. Oil changes at 5,000 miles, brake pads at intervals that made sense. When something did fail, it failed plainly and was fixed quickly. There were no mysteries, no cascading problems. Service managers began to trust the cars. Customers noticed in smaller ways. Keys turned without hesitation in winter. Warning lights stayed dark. Gas receipts stretched farther between fill-ups. Owners stopped thinking about their cars altogether, which was exactly the point. Some realized months had passed since they last opened the hood. Others realized they had stopped budgeting for repairs. The data followed. Independent reliability rankings placed the S-Series next to imports that had defined the category. The badge confused readers, but the placement did not change. Saturn was not perfect, but it was consistent. It behaved the same at 30,000 miles as it did at 80,000. That sameness mattered. Inside Toyota, no alarms sounded. Toyota had built its reputation on repetition and patience. One American car did not threaten a system decades in the making. But inside General Motors, the contrast was unavoidable. Saturn had demonstrated that American plants, American labor, and American engineers could deliver Toyota-level results when freed from old habits. Meetings began to include Saturn's slides. Executives nodded, some asked questions, others shifted uncomfortably. The S-Series did not fail in ways that could be explained away. It did not rely on gimmicks. It did not benefit from novelty. It simply behaved. Yet instead of triggering imitation, the results triggered debate. Scaling Saturn's methods would mean rewriting labor agreements, flattening management structures, slowing launches, and accepting smaller margins up front. It would require discipline where volume had once ruled. It would mean changing systems that rewarded speed over stability. The moment passed quietly. Saturn continued building reliable cars. Toyota continued expanding its lead. General Motors continued operating as a collection of divisions rather than a unified system. The numbers remained impressive, but they stayed contained. On the road, Saturn S-Series cars kept accumulating miles. In driveways, they sat next to Corollas without embarrassment. In repair shops, they were waved through. The proof was everywhere, rolling silently through traffic. What Saturn had achieved was not dominance. It was credibility. And for a brief moment, credibility was enough to show that Toyota's advantage was not cultural or geographic. It was procedural. The window was open. The question was whether anyone would step through it before it closed. The pause that changed everything. As the Saturn SE series continued to perform, the factory in Spring Hill stayed steady. lines moved at a measured pace. Teams kept stopping production for small issues, the way they always had. Cars rolled out consistent, predictable, unremarkable in the best possible way. But outside that factory, something slowed. Inside General Motors, attention drifted. Other divisions demanded capital. Trucks and sport utility vehicles delivered higher margins with fewer structural changes. Executives faced quarterly pressures that rewarded volume today over discipline tomorrow. Saturn's success was acknowledged, but it was treated like a specialty, not a blueprint. Requests to expand Spring Hill's practices stalled in committees. Proposals to replicate Saturn's labor model met resistance. Managers accustomed to layered approvals bristled at flattened hierarchies. The question was no longer whether Saturn worked. It was whether changing the rest of the company was worth the disruption. Saturn itself began to feel the strain. Budgets tightened. Product updates slowed. Engineers were asked to do more with less. The S-Series remained solid, but competitors moved faster in features and refinement. Where Toyota improved incrementally every year, Saturn held its ground, waiting for permission that never came. Dealers noticed the shift. New models arrived less frequently. Marketing grew quieter. The enthusiasm that had once defined Saturn's relationship with its customers dulled. Owners remained loyal, but they also noticed that choices were shrinking. The cars were dependable, but the future felt uncertain. Meanwhile, Toyota did not pause. Plants expanded, processes tightened. Lessons were codified and repeated globally. Small gains compounded. While Saturn waited, Toyota scaled. The moment did not end with failure. It ended with hesitation. Saturn proved the method, but the system around it chose not to change. The gap did not widen overnight. It widened slowly, through inaction. When consistency wasn't enough. By the late 1990s, the Saturn S-Series still did what it had always done. It started, it ran, it asked for little. Owners kept driving them past milestones that once felt ambitious, but the market had shifted. Reliability was no longer surprising, it was expected. Toyota's cars now arrived with the same consistency Saturn had once made novel, paired with fresher designs and broader lineups. The conversation changed. Buyers no longer asked whether a car would last. They asked what else it offered. Inside Saturn, the response was cautious. Changes came slowly. The restraint that had once protected quality now limited evolution. Plastic panels remained. Interiors stayed simple. The car that had once felt refreshingly honest began to feel dated next to competitors that had learned the same lessons and added more. Within General Motors, patience thinned. Saturn's separate status no longer felt strategic. It felt inefficient. The very independence that had allowed the SE series to succeed now marked the brand as an outlier. Integration plans replaced autonomy. Processes softened. Standards blurred. The factory floor changed subtly. Line stops became rarer. Variants crept in. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticed by workers who remembered the early years. The cars were still good, but the edge dulled. On the road, the difference was felt quietly. Owners noticed small things. Trim that wore faster. Interior plastics that aged poorly. The cars remained dependable, but the feeling shifted from trust to tolerance. The Saturn S-Series did not collapse. It faded, not because it failed to match Toyota, but because matching was not enough. Toyota kept moving. Saturn stood still. What had once been a near upset became a missed opportunity. The forgotten American car had played Toyota's game almost perfectly, but in a game built on repetition and commitment, almost was never going to be enough. How? Something that worked was allowed to fade. The end did not arrive with an announcement or a failure notice. There was no press conference, no admission that something precious had been mishandled. Instead, the Saturn S-Series slipped out of relevance the same way it had entered it, quietly. One model year blended into the next. Production numbers softened. Conversations moved on. What had once been treated as a breakthrough slowly became background noise. Inside General Motors, Saturn's success had created an uncomfortable contradiction. The S-Series proved that disciplined manufacturing, empowered workers, and conservative engineering could produce Toyota-level results on American soil. That truth was difficult to absorb because it demanded change everywhere else. To fully embrace Saturn's methods would have meant questioning systems that rewarded speed, scale, and short-term margins. It would have required admitting that the problem had never been capability, but priorities. So Saturn remained contained. Spring Hill continued to build good cars, but it did so with shrinking influence. Capital flowed elsewhere. New product plans stalled. While Toyota refreshed models methodically, year after year, Saturn's updates arrived slowly and cautiously. The S series remained mechanically sound, but visually and technologically static. What had once felt refreshingly simple now felt unchanged. The factory itself changed in ways that were subtle but telling. Early on, workers had stopped the line without hesitation. Later, those pauses became conversations. Conversations became delays. Delays became approvals. Nothing dramatic broke, but something softened. The discipline that once felt instinctive required reinforcement that no longer came. At the corporate level, Saturn's independence was reframed as inefficiency. Executives spoke about integration, synergy, and alignment. The very separation that had protected Saturn from old habits was now viewed as an obstacle to scale. Slowly, Saturn was pulled closer to the parent company's processes, reporting structures, and cost pressures. With each adjustment, the distance between Saturn and Toyota widened. Meanwhile, Toyota did exactly what Saturn had once done, only without hesitation. It expanded its production system, reinforced its culture, and repeated its principles relentlessly. Toyota did not ask whether discipline was worth the effort. It treated discipline as the effort. The results compounded. On the road, the Saturn S series continued to earn quiet loyalty. Owners drove them into high mileage without ceremony, used examples held value better than most domestic competitors. Mechanics still trusted them, but the market had moved. Reliability was no longer a differentiator. It was the entry requirement. What Saturn needed next was evolution without abandoning its foundation. What it received was delay. By the time new platforms and broader strategies arrived, the moment had passed. The advantage Saturn once held had been absorbed by competitors who never stopped refining it. Inside GM, the story was reframed. Saturn became an experiment that had run its course rather than a lesson that demanded replication. The question shifted from, why did this work, to, why didn't it scale? As if the answer lay in Saturn itself, rather than in the resistance surrounding it. The S series did not fail customers. It failed to survive indecision. When production finally wound down, it did so without outrage. The cars had not betrayed anyone. They had simply outlived the patience of the system that created them. Saturn's early promise was remembered fondly by those who owned one, and awkwardly by those who had to explain why something that worked had not been protected. History would later compress the story into a footnote. Saturn tried, Toyota won. But that framing misses the more unsettling truth. Saturn did not lose because it misunderstood the game. It lost because it proved the game could be played, and the company that proved it chose not to keep playing. The forgotten American car had done the impossible. It had nearly beaten Toyota at Toyota's own rules. What it lacked was not engineering, labor, or customers. It lacked institutional courage to stay the course. The lesson Detroit couldn't hold on to. After the Saturn S series faded from prominence, its influence inside General Motors did not vanish overnight. It lingered in training materials, in internal case studies, in the occasional executive presentation that referenced Spring Hill as proof that different was possible. But the lesson never hardened into policy. It stayed theoretical, something to admire rather than adopt. Inside General Motors, the company reverted to what it knew best. Product planning returned to platform sharing and aggressive cost targets. Launch schedules tightened. Feature counts grew. Quality remained a goal, but it competed constantly with speed and margin. Saturn's methods required patience and restraint, and patience was difficult to justify in meetings driven by quarterly results. The people who had built the S series felt the shift most clearly. Engineers who once walked the line daily found themselves pulled back into offices and approval chains. Workers who had stopped production without hesitation now filled out forms. The feedback loop stretched. Small problems still surfaced, but they traveled farther before being addressed. The culture that had once felt protected began to thin. Saturn as a brand lost its clarity. New models arrived that shared more components with other GM vehicles. The differences that once mattered blurred. Plastic body panels disappeared. pricing strategies changed. The showroom experience, once distinctive, became familiar. Loyal customers noticed. They did not complain loudly, they simply hesitated. Meanwhile, Toyota continued to do what Saturn had once demonstrated could work. Toyota refined its production system year after year, across continents, across models, without retreat. Small improvements stacked on top of one another. Quality did not spike, it accumulated. The company did not chase moments, it built momentum. The gap widened not because Saturn declined sharply, but because Toyota never stopped. What Saturn had achieved through deliberate isolation, Toyota achieved through institutional memory. The difference was not intelligence or effort, it was commitment. As the years passed, Saturn's story became easier to simplify. It was described as a failed experiment, an interesting detour, a brand that did not fit. That framing was convenient. It avoided harder questions about why success in one corner of the company had not been protected or replicated. It shifted responsibility away from leadership decisions and toward market inevitability. In reality, Saturn had revealed something uncomfortable. The American auto industry did not lose ground because it lacked the ability to build reliable cars. It lost ground because it struggled to sustain discipline when that discipline conflicted with short-term incentives. Saturn's problem was not that it tried to be different, it was that it was allowed to be different only temporarily. Former Saturn owners still noticed the contrast. They replaced aging S-Series cars with imports that felt familiar in all the ways that mattered. They recognized the same quiet competence, the same lack of drama. The transition felt natural, even inevitable. That familiarity was Saturn's unintended legacy. Within GM, the lesson faded further with time. New crises arrived. New strategies replaced old ones. The window Saturn had opened closed without ceremony. The company moved forward, but it did so without fully absorbing what it had briefly proven. The Saturn S-Series had not failed the test of engineering or manufacturing. It had passed it. What failed was the willingness to let that success challenge the broader system. Detroit did not forget how to build a Toyota-level car. It forgot how hard it had worked to do it, and why it mattered to keep working just as hard when the spotlight moved on. What Saturn proved and why. It still matters with time. The Saturn S-Series slipped fully out of public memory. The cars aged out of driveways. The badges disappeared from dealership signs. New generations of buyers grew up without ever seeing one on the road. Yet the absence itself became the final clue. Saturn did not vanish because it failed. It vanished because its success asked questions the system did not want to keep answering. Inside General Motors, Saturn's legacy was never formally rejected. It was quietly set aside. The company moved on to new priorities, new architectures, new promises. The industry changed, technology accelerated, crises came and went, but the lessons Saturn offered remained unresolved, lingering beneath each reinvention attempt. Saturn had demonstrated, in real factories with real workers, that American manufacturing could deliver Toyota-level consistency when incentives were aligned and discipline was protected. It showed that reliability was not a cultural trait or a national one. It was procedural. It was built into how decisions were made, how problems were handled, and how much patience leadership was willing to exercise. What Saturn lacked was not proof, it lacked endurance. Toyota's advantage had never been a single breakthrough or a single model. Toyota won because it treated its production philosophy as permanent, not experimental. It repeated the same principles through decades of economic cycles, leadership changes, and market shifts. Saturn applied those principles successfully, but only within a protected bubble, and only for as long as that bubble was tolerated. Once the novelty faded, the protection faded with it. The irony is that Saturn did not threaten Toyota by outselling it. It threatened Toyota by revealing that its advantage was not mysterious. It could be replicated. That realization should have been liberating. Instead, it became uncomfortable. Scaling Saturn's approach would have required dismantling hierarchies, slowing launches, and rewarding long-term stability over immediate returns. It would have meant accepting fewer dramatic moments in exchange for fewer regrets. That trade-off was never fully embraced. The Saturn S-Series ultimately became a reference point only in hindsight, a story told after the fact, rather than a strategy carried forward. It is remembered fondly by owners who experienced its reliability, and vaguely by an industry that moved past it. without pausing to ask why it had worked so well. Yet the relevance of Saturn's story has only grown. As the automotive industry enters another transition toward electrification, software-driven vehicles, and global competition once again defined by reliability and trust, the same pressures return. Speed versus discipline, scale versus consistency, vision versus execution. Saturn's lesson sits quietly in the background, waiting to be acknowledged again. It reminds us that transformation does not come from slogans or rebrands. It comes from systems that protect good behavior long after it stops being exciting. Saturn proved that almost beating Toyota was not the hard part. The hard part was deciding to keep playing the same game once the applause faded. The forgotten American car did not lose because it was inferior. It lost because its success was treated as an exception rather than a foundation. Saturn showed what was possible when discipline was allowed to lead. History did not erase that proof. It simply stopped looking at it. And, in doing so, it left behind one of the clearest demonstrations that the gap between Detroit and Toyota was never about ability. It was about commitment and the courage to sustain it when the moment passed. The Saturn S Series did not fail. It was left behind. It proved that America could build a Toyota-level car through discipline, patience, and restraint. What followed was not defeat, but abandonment. A reminder that winning once means nothing if you refuse to keep playing the same game.